Hello everyone and welcome to the second Waterline tutorial. Basically, we're gonna start where we left off last time, and I've kind of used all the methods that I mentioned last time to create another level with a large Waterline actor. This is what it currently looks like, with an ocean that transfers to dark. These are the materials. I'll just quickly open them up in case you would like to have a look at the values and replicate them yourselves. So just a quick scroll down. This is the water surface material, the underwater surface material, and the post-processing material. I'll make sure everything is visible. This time, you may have noticed that I've enabled the post-processing rays, which are now nice, sort of add a bit of motion to the underwater world. But let's get to our main objective for this tutorial, is to create a localized Waterline tutorial for this little pool right here. So, in terms of starter content, I've kind of already created all the high instances from the original materials. So let's just grab a Waterline actor from our content. Waterline actors, and grab the small actor. So this is pretty much what we get from the start, and let's position it to something like 10, where we get a little bit of the rocks underneath the water, a nice transition. And right now the materials are not set to the environment, so they won't show correctly. So let's apply our materials. So our post-processing goes here, the surface material, and undersurface instance. Right now we're getting correct alignment. Let's just fix up our underwater post-processing by disabling the standalone window fix. Now everything is showing up correctly. So let's start by playing around with the surface material a little bit. So I'm just gonna place this, the settings here, expand them to the top and go full screen, so we could view everything a bit better. So, as usual, we have roughness, specular, metallic, and opacity. Something worth noting is that in the previous demo, I mentioned that for a large Waterline actor, you need to adjust the world settings. For a small Waterline actor, you don't need to, but since I have a large water surface here, I have set it up anyway. If this is going to be used just as a background, we don't really need that, but it just takes a few clicks right now to do, so why not have it? For roughness, specularity, those are pretty much standard water we could make. We're a bit rougher, but for this case, let's make a really nice looking pool. Maybe increase the clarity a little bit. 4115, something like that. For water tint color, let's go to something overall bluish. We'll be mainly playing with the shallows and the deeps color for this one. So for water shallows, let's pick a nice sort of green color and increase the value to, let's start with a value of 5. Whoops, sorry. That's a bit strong, so maybe something like 1.5 should be okay. Once we start moving around the deep water color and everything, it will blend a lot nicer. So for the deep color, let's not go full dark this time, but a rather grayish blue, something like this. And let's tweak the values The depth level, we can lower it a bit more, but bring some of that color in by changing the blend. So this is something a lot nicer. We have a nice green sort of value here, and a darker fall off with the deep color in the deep levels, and darker. Let's actually make it a little bit darker, something like this. Maybe adjust the depth level a little bit, and increase this to a similar value. So this is starting to look pretty good. For subsurface color, we do have placed the Waterline light actor. So let's just select something a bit greener. This should do it. Something I would like to adjust is also the light mask verticality. Go with -4 so we can get a little bit more color over here. If we now go into the water normal texture, let's have a look and use something better suited for a smaller pond. Something like this with smaller waves. So let's also change the tile to double it basically in size. So this is pretty good. The speed is now a little bit too large for this map, so I'll lower it to 0.7. And as for normal strength, let's increase the normal strength to yeah, that seems about right. So yeah, in terms of refraction, it's looking pretty good. The distortion from this normal map is nothing too massive, and the opacity is giving us a nice clear look. If we go back to our original value or something higher, you start to lose some of the water clarity, which is something that I like to keep for this particular actor. And this is one of the advantages with the new update of Waterline. You could easily have several water setups and edit them individually. We can even flatten out the waves a little bit with the Waterline actor itself. We'll do that a little bit later. Let's see. I think we're done for the water surface for now, so let's close that up. And next, select our actor, go for the underwater surface material. So open it up and drag it here. I like to dock my menus on the side of the screen, go full screen and just go underwater. It gives you a slightly better view of everything that's going on. So as for roughness, we're gonna set it to 0 like last time, metallic 1, just so we can get the most of the reflections underwater. Let's go with larger opacity because the waters are quite clear, so something similar to this should do it. So that looks pretty good. In terms of refraction, we could probably lower it a little bit, the outside world. Something that you may have noticed with the screen going white from time to time, that will be the post-processing rays that we are just going to quickly open up our post-processing material and disable for the time being. Let's see, like that. So, let's carry on with this. So for color, let's have something in the, nothing too dark, although the surface world is quite visible, but something like this. The sort of less saturation you have, the clearer the reflected world is going to be. And oh, we're getting a tiny line at the bottom. No worries, we'll fix that later. It's nothing too essential. As for surface brightness, I'm actually going to enable the extra boost because we are losing a decent amount of brightness, I feel. But let's go to a slightly darker color. Like this. Like this. So this is something that you can sometimes get when you have a very strong extra brightness boost, so we're actually going to disable this one out and set it to 1. Maybe even lower. This might actually be an issue with the reflections in the scene. We're gonna fix that next. So in terms of detail tile, let's set it to something like 10. Brightness all the way to 5 so we can actually maybe see some of it. But they're non-essential to the scene. This is actually a clear pool, so let's actually set it out to 0. And also the same for the effect and be done with this. In terms of wave normal, let's slow down the speed a little bit. The strength is alright. And for the tile, let's increase it a little bit. That is pretty good. Mesh mask offset is looking okay right now from the post-processing waterline, so we won't be needing to adjust it just yet. So we're pretty much done with our underwater surface. Let's open our post-processing material now and see what we can do about that. So right now the color is not really matching what we're seeing above. It's a little too strong and too green, so let's go with blue. Something similar to this, maybe a little bit darker. It's pretty good. For saturation, I'm actually going to increase it a little bit. This can give you a powerful color and then maybe affect the transition a little bit, but something like 3 should be good for our purposes. The contrast and brightness, okay, we'll maybe adjust the brightness a little bit. Yeah, just so everything is looking, the outside world is also nice and visible. For the shallows, let's go with something you can actually see. If we were to head up here, so maybe we'll go with something like -9 and then lower the blend to 4, where we have a nice neat within camera change. Next, as for the shallows actual boost, maybe 3, so a little too strong. 2.5, 7 should be okay. As for fog range, let's change this value to something a bit better, like 0.3 is what I'm looking for, but then alter the transition to something like 5 maybe. So now the color boost is a bit too strong, maybe lower that. As we're close to the surface it looks a bit overexposed, but going in a bit deeper looks better. As for the blur, I think I'm gonna stick with these values. I'll maybe increase the blur amount a little bit to 1.5. 5. These are relatively clear waters, so increase this a bit. Change over, round them off a little bit. So let's add in the rays now. For right now, this is essentially a really large texture that's being moved around to create the effect of rays. So let's just start with a ray fade of 1.3 and a ray tile. So this is how much the texture is going to be tiling. Change this number to 3. So we have some visible effects. That's looking pretty good. Next, let's change the color. So this is pretty good. Cool that we could change the color somewhat independently, and also the brightness. So bring it down to 1. So this is a nice subtle sort of movement in the fog. That's a pretty cheap effect to have. So that's pretty much it. Let's have a look at the giant blue blob that is the waterline currently. So in terms of line thickness, lower that a little bit to, we should want to 0.9 should do it, and adjust the height to something like this. I forgot to freeze the motion on the waterline actor again, so everything's going a little too fast. And oops. That's the key I wanted to press. So let's set the speed to 0 again, so you can actually see a bit more clearly what's going on. So for line height, this is pretty good. Blur amount, let's lower it. I want it to have a nice crisp effect. Blur height, don't really need, and blur blend are also not going to be very active in this, as we've lowered the blur amount to something like 0. So let's change the color now to something a bit more closely matching to the environment. A bit of saturation, something like that. Maybe darken it up just a little bit. Alright, line blur, underwater height mask. I'm actually going to change that once again to -16 to have a better alignment, and change the blend to 4. Get it nice and sharp. So right now we're seeing a little bit of a offset. So maybe bring back the line to 16, but adjust the thickness and height. There we go. So lower the thickness and place it to something similar to this. In terms of color, let's brighten it up a little bit and just the effects mask. So yeah, after a couple of more minutes of tweaking, these are the sort of colors that I finally arrived in. I also added some water acoustics, much like last time. Now I'm going to show you a few extra tricks with the acoustics. But first, let me just quickly bring up the materials and show you the values. So this is for the water surface. I mainly did some changes to the colors and for the deep colors, water deep color, to bring out a bit more bluish, and the tint to change some additional coloration. For the underwater surface, very few changes. I just mainly changed the color overlay once I had post-processing material that I was happy with. I increased the tessellation to 5 from the standard 3 on both occasions, just to improve the accuracy with the waterline. And finally, here is the post-process material I have. Again, a few color changes to the fog and the blend. That's pretty much it. So now that we have all of these, oh yes, and this is the setup I have for the light function acoustic effect that we have. I use the depth fade blend to set up offset for the bottom. But using this method, you might sometimes stumble into a couple of issues. For example, if we were to walk away from the scene, we find out that all of these rocks on the side now also have this effect. Now there's a quick way to fix this. So a lot of the rocks on the side, if we select each and every one of them and type in channels, we find something called lighting channels. And channel 0 and channel 2 and channel 3 are basically different light layers. Think about it. And by selecting different light layers, you select which light sources affect these. So my main light, skylight and everything, is set to channel 0, so by default essentially. So everything, so this actor will be getting all the light plus things on channel 2. So now we're going to select our light that has the acoustics function. I believe it is this one, yes. Go again to the channels and disable channel 0, and now you see that we've basically lost our light function, but switch it to channel 2 only. So now the floor, rocks that have this enabled on the side will have this, and larger boulders on the outside will not. Oh, I just noticed that the water plane is sticking out a little bit. That's a bit better. And something else, just for an extra bit of detail. Right now should scale X and Y. There we go. So now an extra bit of detail, that sometimes there's a slight chromatic aberration on the light function. A quick way to add this is if we go to our light function, just copy and paste it, give it a slight offset, and set that color to red. Now if we go underwater, we're starting to see that there's a very strong red, a sort of breakdown of the light as it enters the water. But I think we've moved the function a little bit too much, so we're just going to bring it in just like that. So we have a very slight color breakdown. There we go. And that is how we can bring a bit of extra life into the underwater scene. This effect goes really well with the underwater post-processing rays. And yeah. So overall, I think that's it. Thank you for watching. I also added a handful of lights just to create the bounce effect from the water light here. And yeah, this is pretty much everything I have to show on how to use the small Waterline actor. Again, this is an effect that you could move around if you wish, up and down, increase the depth. You see that it'll pretty much stay intact, just don't do horizontal scaling. That offsets some of the materials. And yeah, so let's have a quick look of how everything looks in play. Just open up my materials and make sure I have the standalone fix applied, and I do. Save up our level. And it should start running any moment. I like to apologize for any sort of drops in the frames. My computer can only handle so many things at a time. So we seem to be getting a little bit of a bleed from our water function. I mean light acoustics function. So let's have a look in fixing that. So this is our localized water. And everything is aligning quite well. Went with a narrower, sharper waterline this time. And something else is that if we look down, we're also having some trouble with the shadows. So let's have a look at what we can do about that. So something that we could do is add in a reflection capture. So let's see what happens when we drop one here. So reflections, see, the brightness seems to be way too strong right now. So let's see if we can fix that if we were to just build reflection captures. And no, it hasn't really improved. This can be something due to the strong HDRI that we're using, but there is a quick way to fix it. So instead of using a reflection capture actor, we're going to make one ourselves. So if we go to, if we type up scene capture cube, we get this little camera actor. For the time being, we're going to hide the waterline effect. It'll work better without it. And we're just going to position it somewhere, and under texture target, we're going to select none and create a new one. We're just going to throw it in here, temp render target. And if we now go into our demo folder, we have our render target over here, which is basically a panoramic view of the environment. Now this is basically rendering the scene again, so it's a pretty high and expensive effect, so we don't really want to have it in our final scene. So what we can do is right click on it and say create static texture, and now we basically have a cube map of this area. We're going to go ahead and delete this. Oops. Delete our camera and then delete our render target. And we're going to unhide our waterline actor. We're going to go into modes again and go into the reflection capture sphere. But this time, instead of captured scene, we're going to say a specified cube map. We're going to use our cube map that we just captured with our Capture 3D material, and we're just going to shrink it to something like, let's see, 100. 400 should be okay. place it in the center. To fully cover everything. Excellent. We're not really going to see changes until we build our reflection captures. Right now, you can see that everything has gone back to normal looking. So, looking down, we no longer lose our entire environment reflection. And this is essentially a cheap workaround for planar reflections. Well, it's not much different than using the reflection capture actor by itself, but sometimes it can break down in some cases, and knowing how to work around it can be a big plus. So a quick way to fix this is to go to basically where your lighting channels are and deselect affect translucent lighting. If you have that selected, translucent surfaces such as the sea, the water surfaces, will have the horrible flickering artifacts we saw previously. So disable this, and everything will be fine. And something that we could do now is actually, I don't know, it's looking pretty good now. So, and there's no clipping outside. All the geometry is being affected well. So, all in all, this is how you can get some pretty good use out of Waterline for the small local Waterline actor in combination with the larger one. Let's just hit play once again. All of our testing done. So just wait for the textures to fully load in, and we're good to go. No more light flickering on the large sea surfaces. And our small Waterline actor. Two fully independent Waterline actors using different materials for everything. So let's just have a quick dive. Surfaces are aligning properly, the effects and everything. We can go down. We can also go into the large ocean because we've set up our large Waterline actor properly in the level. And once again, my laptop is struggling to keep up with everything that's going on, so I'm gonna cut this tutorial short right here.